Story 1. I moved from Oklahoma to Alaska a little over a year ago. I applied for a job as a cook at a nursing home on a whim and did not expect to hear back. They called to schedule a phone interview the same week, and it went well. I soon received an offer letter. I have no regrets. My coworkers are great, my managers are the best, and most importantly, I love cooking for the residents. Story 2. I was cheated on and my job was terrible, so I left both and moved far away to start over in my early 30s. I went back to university and got a much better job. While I was in school, I also met the love of my life. No regrets. Story 3. I met a man in an online game. I was out of work and not doing well, so when he invited me to visit and offered to pay for the ticket, I flew from Arizona to Switzerland to meet him. The first time I sat across the table from him, I knew I was going to marry him. That initial visit lasted a month. As soon as I returned to the United States, I put my affairs in order and moved to Switzerland with nothing but what would fit in 2 suitcases and 2 large boxes that I had shipped beforehand. I had no regrets. I loved him with every fiber of my being, and we were happy together even though we had almost nothing. When he died, I did the same thing in reverse. I packed up our whole apartment by myself within a month, left notes about who should receive what and what needed to be donated, and flew back to Arizona with just my 2 suitcases and the 2 large boxes I had shipped. It was one of the worst things I have ever had to do, and I regret it completely, but there was no way I could have supported myself in Switzerland. Story 4. I lived in Massachusetts. In 2002, my girlfriend and I were in a car crash. She was killed. People were terrible in the aftermath. In 2004, I joined the United States Navy and moved across the country at its expense. I met a woman locally and we married. We bought a house. I left the Navy after 4 years and began a career. We had a child and I started a band. We advanced in our careers, sold our house, and bought a larger, nicer home. Now I play in 2 bands. My brother-in-law is perhaps my closest friend. My wife and son are my greatest joy and inspiration. I am living my best life and feel very happy and lucky. I never thought I would be like a dandelion seed carried so far by the wind, but I am incredibly grateful for my path. Story 5. I escaped a toxic, abusive relationship. I sold everything I owned, cashed out my savings, and moved to Mexico. I met a woman on the opposite side of the continent. We chased each other across North America, settled in my hometown, married, and had 3 children. After 25 years there, we moved to a new city and became empty nesters. We are still wildly in love and living our best lives together. No regrets. Story 6. I got on a plane with my son, my dog, for tote bags, and nowhere near enough cash, and flew to the city where we wanted to live. I knew it was my last chance to leave my hometown, and I was not going to miss it. I did not want my son to stay there any longer. That was 8.5 years ago, and while it has not always been easy, not a day goes by that I am not grateful that we left. My father once told me when I was about 22 that sometimes you just have to jump. He was not wrong. We have no regrets about leaving. Story 7. I left everything behind in Iran and started from zero in the Midwest with only the clothes on my back. It was the 1990s and you could still claw your way up then. Took me longer than average, but I finally completed dental school. With very little money in the bank, I left my abusive ex and everything I owned and moved into a tiny office I had built in a rural, underserved town. It has been nearly 8 years, and I am happy to say I have met and surpassed every career and financial goal I set for myself. There were many times I had to dust myself off and start over. I did not give up. When one plan failed, I tried another. Roughing it did not bother me because I knew it was temporary. Story 8. After 10 years of marriage, I discovered my husband had been cheating on me for most of our marriage with sex workers. I separated and divorced, then reconnected with an old friend who is now my boyfriend. I moved to the city where I went to high school and started again. It has been 7 months and it has been very hard, especially doing it in my late 30s. Making new friends is difficult because people are often busy with children, careers, or other friendships. I have found many rewarding opportunities by volunteering and by getting to know myself again and who I am at this stage of life. It was incredibly difficult, but also the most rewarding thing to realize I could do it and create a better life if I wanted one. Story 9. I had enough of Toronto and Ontario after 14 years of work. I sold a lot of my belongings, packed what I could not part with, and drove to the West Coast. I was depressed and lonely for 6 weeks and doubted my choices, but I pulled up my big girl pants and moved on mentally. Turned out to be a great choice. I went to graduate school, started a new career, and met my husband, now my husband of 30 years. Story 10. It was dumb luck. I met someone attractive online, did not think much of it, made a bunch of bad jokes, and fell in love by accident. I tried to shrug it off as a misunderstanding. A year later, I moved halfway around the world with $7 in my wallet to be with them. Their whole family took me in, and they have supported me for almost 7 years. A group of angelic strangers saved my life. I won the emotional lottery. Story 11. I planned and failed several westward moves in my life. In 2020, I had my heart broken and decided to finally make it happen. I got rid of almost everything and moved in with my mother. I saved every penny for about 6 months and finally made the move from New Hampshire to California. I packed my motorcycle and the last of my belongings into a small moving truck and drove more than 3,000 miles across the country. I have since met the woman of my dreams, married her, and am doing well financially. I left behind many friends and family members, but I have no regrets. Story 12. I had a mental breakdown and left a big city to go to a much smaller one. In hindsight, it was the right thing to do. Story 13. After a failed attempt at not being here anymore, I sold all my stuff, emptied a 401k retirement account, converted a school bus into a tiny home, sold my house, and traveled for several years. I went from coast to coast across 40 states. I returned to trauma land and decided I needed to leave again. I am on the other side of the country now and will never cross the Mississippi River again. Regrets? Plenty. None of them keep me up at night or make me want to go back there. Story 14. I had nothing left to lose and nothing keeping me where I was. So I packed a suitcase, bought a bus ticket, and moved 1,000 miles from my hometown. I have no regrets. I'm in a much better place mentally. I have had better jobs, and without this move, I would never have met my husband. Leaving was the best decision I have ever made. Story 15. I moved 3,000 miles from one coast of the United States to the other. I regret everything about it. Story 16. Like many others, I moved away and prioritized myself around the age of 28. The key was making a drastic change that was both challenging and focused on my priorities. I grew dramatically in a short period of time and was no longer stuck. Story 17. I've had to start over several times in my life. Once, when I left my hometown, I had next to nothing and had to sleep on a giveaway mattress in a bare room. Then it happened again when the pandemic hit and I had to leave my then current living space with nothing but 2 garbage bags of clothes. Not even a few $1,000s in the bank. Once the pandemic cleared, I had to start over again, throwing out everything except a mattress I got from Target with very little money. How did I do it? By skipping meals, desperately searching for work, and taking whatever I could get, aided by a large measure of luck and timing. Had any small thing gone wrong then, such as an injury, a missed job, or a friend unable to lend money, I might have died. It is remarkable how lucky I was at times. There were moments when I was literally days from being homeless. Do I have regrets? Yes. I lost some friends during those years whom I wish I could talk to again, but I cannot turn back the clock. I am in a very good place now, with a job I love and a career path I am looking forward to. Story 18. I made wonderful friends at conventions and through writing over a couple of years. I came to Seattle for one of those conventions, and the first moment in this city it felt like home. I was 43 and looking for something I could not name. A couple of friends wanted to get a place together out here and asked if I would like to join them. It was the middle of the pandemic, and I never hesitated to say yes. I moved from the deep south about 3,000 miles away. One friend is like a sister now, a confidant I trust with my life. I got a much higher paying job here, met my partner at that job, and am helping raise her 4-year-old son. Every day I can stand on the roof, see beautiful snow-capped mountains and the soothing waters of Puget Sound. There have been tumultuous times, but I have never regretted moving here. I can be my whole self on the West Coast, and the risks were worth the rewards. Back in Georgia, my friends and family said I was so brave to do this. I just wanted a bigger life, and now I have the fullest life possible. I have bliss. Story 19. Reading a lot of this, I get the impression that leaving everything behind only happens when you do not have anything to leave behind. I would like to hear someone who is not at absolute zero decide to leave everything behind. I am financially comfortable, but I am exhausted with my life. However, leaving behind what I have built seems crazy to me. Story 20. The answer seems to be that if you get extremely lucky and meet the love of your life after moving, you will not regret it. Otherwise, you likely will. Story 21. How it happened wasn't that hard. I realized I hated the state I was in, Florida, and that I did not like my boyfriend, my job, or my life. I had nothing to lose. I sold just about everything I owned, loaded up my car, and drove cross-country. Absolutely no regrets. This was about 11 years ago. Story 22. After 20 years of living in capital cities, I moved to a tiny seaside village on the wild coast of South Africa, built and ran a small guest house, and became a full-time stoner. The woman I ran away with, who became my partner, passed away in January. I am still here with my cannabis, my golden retriever, and my little spot in paradise. No regrets. Story 23. I went from the West Coast to the East Coast and back. I went through several cycles of rise, fall, and rise again. My advice, do it. You only live twice, and your second life begins when you realize you only live once. Story 24. I decided to leave my bubble on the East Coast after college. I sold everything I owned except for some clothes and my car and headed west. I have to say the first few years were some of the hardest and loneliest of my life. I drifted for quite a while before I found my footing. I went through it again when I joined the military. That was almost 10 years ago, and since then I have lived all over the United States. I had some great experiences and some bad ones, but that is part of life no matter where you are. I wholeheartedly believe I am better for it. There are always points in life when you look back and wonder, what if? I prefer to look forward, not back, and I believe every step I took, even the missteps, made me who I am today. I would not change it for the world. Story 25. Some of these stories make me hurt so much. I wish I were this certain about what I wanted out of life and actually did things. I feel like no matter where I am or what I do, I always just sort of sit there. No relationships, no deep friendships, no passions to be swept up in, no real projects. I do not live my life, and seeing others do so hurts because I know I am missing out. At the same time, I want peace and quiet. I lack an internal drive. I have no strong vision for my life and no idea how to change that, or whether I even truly want to. Story 26. My great-grandfather went off to World War II and left his children in the countryside after his wife died. He never returned to them or to the house. He started a new life. Decades later, when deoxyribonucleic acid testing became available, my grandfather discovered he had half-siblings who had grown up a few towns over. It turned out his father had not started over very far away. He regretted everything, but he was still a massive asshole. I suppose that is what you get for being British at the start of the 20th century. Story 27. It took me a while to make this decision, and I have no regrets. Story 28. Sold everything and moved from New Zealand to Australia. That is like moving interstate for Americans. There are higher wages and better weather. It took a couple of years to find good friends. Other than missing family and friends from home, the only regret is not doing it sooner. Story 29. When I disclosed a relative's abuse and my mother denied it and asked me to leave my home, I decided it was time to finally follow my dream of living on a sailboat. I moved to Tennessee and launched the Hoptoad about 4 months ago. I have no regrets. I am amazed at how it feels to go about my days without the constant fear of my abuser becoming angry with me. I love my boat and do not miss having people around. I have nothing tying me down and think I might move around every year or so to see new places for the rest of my life. Story 30. I did it a few years ago. I literally gave away everything I owned, said goodbye to everyone I knew, and flew across the ocean to join a convent that did not allow any communication with the outside world apart from one letter written to our parents each month. I had visited the sisters before and enjoyed the experience. Once I was in, everything changed and I suffered what is often termed spiritual abuse and physical neglect. I lasted 4 months before giving up and returning to the United States with only the clothes on my back. I regret it because it was a waste of time and caused severe damage to my mental health and my soul. The silver lining is that it was a reset. I learned to value material things properly. It gave me no excuse not to finish my degree once I returned, and now I have my dream job. Story 31. Leaving everything behind is cheap therapy with high airfare. You swap comfort for chaos and call it freedom. Regret is just nostalgia in disguise. The real test is whether your new life scares you more than your old life bored you. Story 32. I did it just after I graduated from college. I was depressed and had been contemplating suicide for a long time, and I told myself I wanted to see the world first. I moved to Germany with less than $300 in my account and told myself I had to make it work somehow. I hitchhiked or scraped together cash and have been to more than 60 countries since then. I worked various jobs in big cities, volunteered for non-governmental organizations in remote villages, and stayed in people's homes in exchange for housework. I eventually met and married the love of my life. 13 years later, we are settled in New Zealand. Now I want to live forever so I can spend the rest of my life with him. Story 33. I have done this twice. The first was when I left the high-control religious group I grew up in. I was 27 and lost everyone who loved me and knew me. I made some less than stellar choices. I also went to college and now have 2 master's degrees. I met new friends, got married, divorced, and married again to the absolute love of my life, and I had children. I am 54 now, so that was a lifetime ago. I remember being scared and basically going into hiding so I would not be excommunicated and could still talk to my parents. It all seems so long ago, and I marvel that I had the courage to do that. My life is so much better in so many ways because I was courageous enough to risk everything. Most recently, 2.5 years ago, my husband, 2 of our 4 children, and 2 cats moved from Arizona, where I was born, to Rhode Island. The other 2 children are adults. One was in college and has since moved with us, and the other left a couple of years earlier for work in Pennsylvania. Starting over in my 50s is hard, but I love it. I live near the ocean and say all the time, "How is this my life?" Professionally, I am doing well, and my family is thriving. Both situations were hard for different reasons. I will forever be grateful that I managed to finish a bachelor's degree at 36. I started working on it at 32 when I had a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. But I did it, and that taught me I could do anything. I was the first person in my extended family to go to college, and my 2 adult children have also finished college. My degree changed the trajectory of my family, and it never would have happened if I had stayed in that religion. Story 34. I drove from New York to California in 2015. I left everything and everyone I knew behind except my dogs. Life is peaceful. I have never been happier or more content. Absolutely zero regrets. Story 35. At 27, I moved from the United States with my dog to Italy, then to Germany. It has been a learning experience, but I have been very miserable and have met people who stereotype me for being an American without even getting to know me. Next month, I will be 31, and in 2 weeks, I will regrettably return to the United States. Story 36. I haven't been able to leave anything. He won't move out. This is my house. Now he says he has cancer. Our daughters don't want him out on the streets. I've set boundaries. I still worry about my safety and Malachi's. Worse than killing me would be hurting Malachi. I'm not a perfect person, but I won't be manipulated. He is unraveling. I can see it in his behavior. Story 37. I sold everything I owned in 2000 and traveled the United States by bus because I was an alcoholic who could not get my life together. I went all over and had some amazing and wild experiences, but I ran out of money a few months later and had to get a job in Phoenix, Arizona. I had never been there before, but that is where I ended up. Turned out I was still drinking, and I married someone with a drug addiction, thinking we would get sober together. It was a terrible idea. She left me alone with our daughter, and my life became worse than it had been before I left. I got sober in 2006 and now have 5 children, a beautiful home, and a fulfilling life. I raise my children and spend a lot of time at treatment centers helping other men get their lives together. I do not regret anything that led me to be who I am and where I am today. Story 38. I've been considering burning everything left of my previous life and disappearing across the country within the next couple of years. A name change and a complete fresh start. I'm 3/4 of the way there now. Most connections are severed. But there are a few I don't want to lose. They mean so much to me. Yet I feel that to live my most authentic life, I can't have anyone left to know my deepest, darkest secret. Those who will always see me through that twisted, false lens of what never should have been. I just want to feel normal, and they all make me feel everything but that. Story 39. I stayed at a women's shelter for almost a year. Now, more than 10 years later, I am happy and enjoying my life. I do need therapy, and I sometimes use Stardew Valley to cope. Story 40. I hated my job, my house, and where I lived. My husband called me at work to tell me he had just accepted a job offer that would begin in 2 weeks on the other side of the country. I hung up, quit my job, packed what I could into a suitcase, and we left. It was one of our favorite moves. Even though we have made 3 more short-notice cross-country moves in the 20 years since, that first remains my favorite. Story 41. I was bored with my work and life while living in North Wales. I got a 1-year working holiday visa for Australia, and 6 months later I quit my job and sold almost all of my belongings. 18 years later, I am still living in Australia. I became an Australian citizen in 2013 and would not change it for anything. Story 42. I lost my wife and best friend a few years ago. Then I cared for my elderly mother, who died 2 years later. After that, I uprooted my life and moved from the Midwest to Central Florida. No regrets. My old home and neighborhood had become a reminder of what I had lost. In hindsight, I decluttered before moving but should have gotten rid of more. I had a general idea of where I wanted to live, but it would have been wise to spend more time scouting specific areas. My house sold quickly, so I had to find a new place on short notice. I tend to take my time making decisions. The whole process was hectic, but it worked out well. Story 43. I packed whatever fit into my Honda Civic and drove 800 miles away from the city. I had a dream job that gave me panic attacks every Sunday night. I was terrified that leaving would mean I was a failure or that I was throwing away my potential. The physical part of leaving was actually easy. Selling furniture on Craigslist was surprisingly therapeutic. It felt like shedding dead weight. The mental part was the hardest. Do I have regrets? Only one. I regret spending 5 years being miserable because I was afraid of being broke. I make about 40% less money now than I did back then. But I have not had the Sunday scaries in 3 years. I have time to cook, I sleep 8 hours, and I actually like the person I see in the mirror. Peace of mind is expensive, but it is worth the pay cut. Story 44. During the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, I reconnected with a guy I grew up with. He was in jail. We only spoke on the phone and I never sent him money. I fell madly in love with him. He was about to get out on parole after serving 4 years, and I was still a homeless addict for more than 10 years, so I wanted to get my life together for when he was released. My sister had recently moved to North Carolina, so she came back to Connecticut to get me, and I left with her. I got clean cold turkey and got a job. I traveled back a few times to visit him while saving to move back so we could get a place together. 8 months later, literally the day after my last visit, he stopped answering my calls and texts. When we finally spoke, he said he needed space. I later found out on Facebook that he had met someone else and moved in with her about a month after my final trip. I had been single for about 6 years after a hugely toxic relationship. I swore never again. I loved drugs more than anything and would not give them up for anyone. In April, it will be 3 years since I moved here and 2 years since he left me. It has gotten easier, but I am still heartbroken and extremely homesick, still trying to save for a car and maybe, one day, to go home. But I am clean. I have my driver's license again. I have been promoted to shift manager at my job. I have a bed to sleep in every night and a roof over my head, and in about 2 weeks I will be turning 46. I never thought I would make it past 40. Story 45. I joined the army out of high school. My home life and family were bad for the most part. I probably would have never looked back except that I fell in love with a girl right before leaving. We had a whirlwind long-distance romance. Daily letters during basic training, frequent visits, and we married before I deployed. The marriage collapsed under the weight of impossible odds. I returned home from the war after 4 or 5 life-altering traumas and a really sad breakup. With 1 year left in the army, I decided to sow my wild oats and have my slutty college experience now that I was single. Then I met a female airman who had combat experience and was also neurodivergent. She was basically a female version of me. I planned to keep it casual with her. But I am a romantic and I fell in love immediately. My gay friend at work said I was a lesbian trapped in a man's body. I guess because I moved in with women on the second date or something. When I got out of the army at 21, I decided to stick around the area despite having no ties other than her. Then, when she had a permanent change of station a couple years later, we got married and I became her dependent. I spent some time at an overseas military base bartending at the enlisted club. I met my wife at 21. I'm now 39. I have spent half my life with her and I have plenty of regrets. But that is not one of them. If I could tell you one fact about us to illustrate how and why we work, we have been married for 15 years and she still has her maiden name, not because of feminism but because of executive dysfunction. She had intended to take my name but never did, and I do not blame her. It seems like a real pain in the ass. Story 46. I moved from Syracuse, New York, to Bellingham, Washington, in 1976 with my wife and our 6-month-old son. We had no job prospects but felt New York was heading for hard times. We left family and friends behind, and there was no internet to keep in touch. I have few regrets. Story 47. I sublet my apartment with most of my things in it, loaded my car with as much as I could, rented an Airbnb for a month in my new city, and drove there. That month gave me time to explore the city and find a permanent apartment. I moved for better work opportunities and got a job offer 2 weeks before the move. No regrets. Story 48. I am in the middle of it right now. I unexpectedly quit my job in May and moved to Europe. If I had told myself at the beginning of the year all that has happened in 2025, she would probably have passed out from shock. It was not even on my radar to move continents in my lifetime, let alone this year. I did it by sheer determination and by putting myself and my priorities above what society tells us to value. I decided I did not want the fancy career. I just wanted to be happy and live at a slower pace. Is it worth it? It is a question I ask myself daily. Picking up everything and starting over in a place where no one knows you is the hardest thing I have ever done. And I am very aware that I am living a different kind of life from my friends back home. It is also very rewarding. I am in the middle of it, so ask me in a year or two once I have fully settled in. Story 49. I left my violent ex-husband in the middle of the night. I took my dog and some clothes and gave him everything in the divorce. I ended up living in my car, then in a tiny apartment with no furniture. It was the best thing I could have done. I found myself again. Story 50. My hand was forced after my family found furry pornography on my laptop. I couldn't stay at my job after that, but I needed to remain for 2 weeks to give my employer 2 weeks' notice. Those were the worst 2 weeks of my life. I drove without a clear destination and ended up in Edmonton. I have many regrets. I live in a poor apartment now and had to sell much of my childhood collection, including my old Thomas wooden railway set. I also sold my first car because I discovered about 3 weeks after moving that I had left the spare key with my family. I sold the laptop as well, which allowed me to buy a nicer car. I regret having to sell those things, but I had no other options, and it was probably time to move out. Story 51. I have none. I left my family because they abused me financially. It was liberating, but sometimes I feel sad. Still, it is better than being sad without money. Story 52. Fantastic. I got married. I own a house and 2 cars. I hate returning there, though. Story 53. There was a shooting at my soul-sucking workplace that resulted in casualties. It awakened something in me and gave me the courage to leave a relationship of more than 2 years that was going nowhere. I quit that job soon after, sold everything I owned, and moved back home to live with my parents, feeling broken and numb. That was about 10 years ago. Today, I am married to the love of my life and have started a business that I truly love and see myself doing long-term. In a couple of months, we will move to Spain with our 2 cats to begin a new chapter together. Life works in mysterious ways. Story 54. I wasn't going anywhere in the cesspool of a hometown where I grew up. One Sunday morning in 2001, I packed my things into my Jeep Cherokee and drove cross-country. I started a new life, met the love of my life, and formed a family. I wish I had kept the Jeep. When I finally visited my hometown in 2016 for a funeral after 15 years, my old high school classmates still seemed to be living in high school. Story 55. I emigrated by accident. I moved to Melbourne for a year and never went back. It has been 20 years now. I have a house and 2 Australian children. I am happy to be here every day. I still have stuff in boxes in friends' lofts and garages. Story 56. It was the best thing I ever did. In my mid-20s, I followed a gut instinct and went alone. I left a secure job and career with no leads, worked my way up in a completely different field, and I would not be where I am now if I had not dared to jump into the unknown. Over the years, when people asked why I emigrated, they assumed it was because of a relationship, either leaving a bad one or moving to be with a partner. They could not accept that it was a decision made entirely for myself. No one else was involved. It is important to prioritize yourself sometimes and do what is right for you. I have 0 regrets and love my life and where I ended up after several more moves. Story 57. I grew up in a broken home, constantly suffering one form of abuse or another, and remaining financially dependent and trapped until I was 28. I met my now husband when he walked into the coffee shop where I worked, which my parents owned. He asked for chocolate milk because his blood sugar was low. We talked every day afterward, and 3 weeks later, while my parents were out, we packed everything we could into his tiny car, including a suitcase, a box of yarn, my spinning wheel, and 3 books, and moved into his small studio apartment. I have not seen my parents since. We have been married for 8 years, and I cannot imagine doing life with anyone else. Story 58. Unhappy in my relationship and marriage from 21 to 31. I knew I should not have married this person, but I did anyway, thinking things would get better. I fell victim to the sunk cost fallacy. He was not a bad person, but we were a terrible match, and we were both too immature to end things gracefully. There was a lot of toxicity on both sides. It was a mess, and I was not the best person in the relationship either. I had an ectopic pregnancy and felt overwhelmed and unable to find a path forward. I went on a work trip to Madrid right before the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic and met an incredible person from another state who was attending the same international meeting. Nothing happened, but I knew I needed to leave and explore other options. It was my final push. I left and moved to that other state. I would not have left if I had not physically moved and ripped the bandage off when I found the courage. I did not tell anyone. I ended the marriage, got in my car, and drove away. That was 5 years ago. Today, I have a 2-week-old baby, and I am the happiest and most well-adjusted I have ever been. My former partner is also getting remarried and seems much happier in his new life. As a bonus, the man I ended up with and I are 29 years apart, and it is the best relationship I have ever had. It may seem strange to many, but that baby and my partner were worth every risk. Story 59. You get 2 lives. The second one begins when you realize you only have one. Story 60. Once again, I am sifting through an AskReddit thread to see if my ex, who spent my life savings to move 2,000 miles away before breaking up with me, has anything to say for herself. Story 61. Commenting to return to this thread. Every day I struggle between ending my life and packing my things and starting over. I have no friends and no close family, and my full-time job does not allow me to afford an apartment. There is nothing left for me here anymore. If I knew anyone elsewhere, I would be gone and would pay them to let me stay with them. I envy those who were able to just pack up and leave. I'm really sorry you're feeling this way. If you are thinking about harming yourself or are in immediate danger, please call your local emergency number right now. In the United States, you can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, I can help find local crisis resources. Do you feel safe right now? Story 62. I was in my late 20s. My roommate was an alcoholic and was stealing from me. I found out my best friend was addicted to various drugs. I looked around and asked myself if this was what I wanted for the rest of my life. I had just received my teaching certificate and realized I could go pretty much anywhere. I kicked my roommate out, terminated my lease, and moved to the Navajo reservation to teach. It was the best and scariest thing I had ever done. There was no reliable phone service, no television unless I had a satellite, and the nearest grocery store was a 45-minute drive down the highway. It was lonely at times, but it felt like I had reset my entire life. I met a woman, we had a child, and eventually moved to Texas. I never looked back. Story 63. We moved cross-country from Washington State in the United States to the Kansas City metropolitan area in the Midwest with 2 children and 2 cats. I like it much better so far. Our lease was up in Washington, and I felt that God had better plans for us, so we sold and donated almost everything except the essentials. Clothes, shoes, some kitchen items, special belongings and toys, important papers, some camping gear such as blankets and pillows and snacks. I prayed ahead of time, received the green light to go, and we made it here peacefully, thankfully. The move was intense, but I already loved road trips, so it felt worth it. I have much more peace where we live now. There are many food pantries here to help, and people seem friendlier, which made me feel much better about moving. We are much poorer here than we were in Washington, but we have a roof over our heads, food to eat, and I can care for my children, so overall I have more peace. Story 64. After 22 years, I finally left my ex because the kids were no longer living with us, and living with someone who is abusive is really bad for your mental health. 2 weeks later, the pandemic put us into some of the harshest lockdowns in the world, so I am glad I got out when I did. Getting a divorce, renovating and selling a house while the world was in turmoil and working a high-pressure job was not easy. 2 days after the divorce was finalized and the house had been sold, the company I worked for advertised internally for people interested in relocating to either Denver or London. I had previously visited Denver a few times and loved it. Given the timing, I discussed it with my kids, and they both said I should take the opportunity. My youngest was interested in coming along too. The visa application process took much longer than we expected. As it turned out, my youngest turned 21 before the visa was approved, so my company could no longer sponsor her as a dependent. Sadly, she had to stay in Melbourne, Australia. My visa was approved in October 2023. I gave away or discarded 99% of my possessions, rented my house to someone else, and boarded a plane with 2 suitcases and my snowboard bag to start my new life in Colorado. My cat could not come immediately. He joined me 3 weeks later. Now I live 1 to 2 hours drive from some of the world's greatest mountains, in a city where I feel truly happy, and my kids visit occasionally. I have learned how to be alone, something I was not comfortable with before moving. For 8 months of the year, I go snowboarding every weekend. I am the happiest I have been since the 1990s, and it looks like my contract will be extended next year, so I will be here for at least a few more years. Story 65. I fully expected to fail when moving overseas and starting a new life, but I did not expect my career, relationship, and overall well-being to take off so positively. Now I am constantly consumed by imposter syndrome and feel that I do not deserve this life. Story 66. I am very happy with how it went. I moved to the opposite side of the world for my job. I still have a mortgage on a lovely apartment back home. I am married in a foreign country. I am starting a family, and I have strong job security. There were ups and downs, including loneliness and culture shock. I had to persevere, and I feel strongly that I made the right choice. I grew up in an abusive household, so leaving my family behind was not a factor. My friend group was amazing, and I can still visit every year. Story 67. I wish the people who left everything behind and became, I don't know, a monk or something could respond. This thread shows survivorship bias. Story 68. I left Canada and moved to Japan because I felt I did not fit the suburban lifestyle. Since I arrived, I have more friends than ever, 10 times the opportunities, and I met my partner from Australia. We run a business together. Sometimes your environment is the biggest hindrance to growth. I do miss my family and wish I could see them more, but that is all. Story 69. In 1987, I realized that what I was doing wasn't working. For a couple of years, I worked and saved a little, biding my time. I met a beautiful woman with a heart of gold who was also afflicted with wanderlust. We sold everything that wouldn't fit into a 1970s Chevrolet van and a 4x8 trailer and set off to the west. 3 months later, with tales of unidentified flying objects and dysentery behind us, we arrived at the Oregon coast at Coos Bay. We eventually managed a high-end condominium complex and parlayed that into sweet gigs back east. Then the love of my life succumbed to cancer. Subsequently, I found my high school crush back in my old stomping grounds, and we have 20 awesome years in the books. Life is a motherfucker. No regrets. Story 70. I had a job at one of the big telecommunications companies that I hated. They offered a $50,000 buyout plus relocation. I took it, moved across the country, and went to culinary school. 5 months later, I met my now husband, who is my best friend. Although I no longer work in the culinary field, I spent 5 years as a development chef before moving into data analytics. I now work from home permanently, and so does my husband. We have a quiet, drama-free, loving home with 2 rescue mutts and great friends. Story 71. I moved from my native Florida to Washington State with 4 children, ages 3 to 18, after my divorce. I only told my sister, my soon-to-be ex-spouse, and my best friend. I had a degree, but I was a stay-at-home mom and had not worked since the birth of my first child. When I arrived, I had no job, no car, and did not know anyone. My degree was outdated because the field had advanced significantly. I only had rent paid for a year. I went back to school to earn another degree and secured a job just before I graduated. I worked full-time and worked very hard to gain skills. I have been able to take care of my family. The children did well, and the youngest is about to graduate. I am very proud of them, not just for their tangible accomplishments, but for the wonderful people they have become. To be honest, it has been extremely hard. I am permanently homesick for my home state, and living here is a severe culture shock. I am not unhappy that I made the move, though. I was diagnosed and treated late for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Life would have been very different if I had been under treatment, and I regret that very much. Story 72. I was working a meager landscaping job in Ohio when my boss cheated me out of promised raises and bonuses. I left town and moved to Maryland with my family, taking what I thought would be a temporary office supply store job to hold me over. I hit it off at the company, learned a lot, and discovered it was an AbilityOne agency that supplies the government and the military. After a year, I was promoted to buyer, and the company moved me from Maryland to New Jersey and doubled my salary. It has been a year since the move, and it has been nothing but amazing for me and my family. New Jersey gets a bad reputation, but I love it. Story 73. I ran away from home when I was 20. I wasn't doing too badly for a while until the people I had become friends with started using Truth Social. They were caring otherwise and were trying to get better. Then I cut everyone out of my life and quit my job that had me working more than 20 days in a row. It wasn't for me. I'm working in retail now, and it's not that bad. I have a major uphill battle ahead of me, and I need to stop being a piece of shit. Story 74. I left my professional career, my mother, my siblings, relatives, and friends. All my belongings were in a carry-on, and I traveled with a baby in my arms to start a new life in a country I did not know and whose language I did not speak. It was the best decision of my life. I changed my life and my baby's life forever. My husband and I sacrificed much, and it was worth it. Story 75. Can someone like this comment to remind me to come back to this? I have been going through a hard time, but it is nice to hear people's stories. Story 76. I moved from California to Texas 23 years ago. I quit my job and did temporary work, got a small apartment and started over. It was the best decision I ever made. Story 77. I had just retired from the military and was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. I had $100, no phone, a backpack of clothes, and a 1999 Honda Civic with a full tank of gas. I drove north on the interstate until I reached the first town with a National Hockey League team. I figured I would watch a hockey game before I died. It was summer, so there were no National Hockey League games, but I went to the ice rink anyway to get some skating in. I sat on a bench while a little boy ran around. His shoes were untied, so I told him to tie them. He said he did not know how and asked me to tie them for him. I said, "Come here, kid, I will teach you." He noticed my skates and asked if I could teach him to skate. I said yes, but he said he did not have skates and was just waiting for his dad. I rented a pair for him and took him on the ice. Teaching him awoke something in me. This kid was a blank slate, clean and unbroken. I wanted to teach him everything and prepare him for life better than I had been prepared. Teaching him to skate became a regular thing. I added other simple skills as well. His parents were happy and recommended me to other parents. I was hired at a summer camp where I taught many different skills. I worked until I could rent a place instead of living out of my car and showering at the ice rink. A little 4-year-old boy saved my life. I am still alive 15 years later because a kid did not know how to tie his shoes. I have no regrets. Recently, I had to start my life again after 11 years in an abusive relationship. I left with a duffel bag and a dog. I left behind everything I had built. My business, house, and cars. Leaving was better than staying and fighting my manipulative and abusive ex. It is rough, but when I think about that kid, I know I can do it again. Story 78. I have done this 5 times. Each time my life improved. I will cut someone off. No regrets. After so many times, I have realized relationships cause significant distress and are not good for me. Story 79. I worked a job I hated and lived with volatile people with whom I was in an uncomfortable friends with benefits relationship. I felt trapped and every attempt to leave failed. I met my partner in a niche Twitter roleplay group. We became close friends and ended up falling in love. After meeting in person twice over about a year and a half, we decided to move in together. They flew to Alabama and I drove with them and my 2-year-old dog Chance, who later passed away, to California on a 5-day road trip. We have been happily married for 8 years as of this March. We have a lovely home with a big yard, 2 dogs, a cat, and several stray cats we feed and shelter. I have a job I love, and my social circle is very small. I could not be happier to have left so much of the toxicity of Alabama behind. No regrets. Story 80. I met a guy on a silly little game on my phone. I flew 10,500 miles to meet him and just knew he was the one. After a few trips, I packed 2 suitcases and moved to the other side of the world to be with him. I have 0 regrets. He is the best person I have ever met, and I am stupidly in love with him. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.